Google Stadia was supposed to be the cleanest version of the future console quality games without a console. No box under the TV, no huge upgrade cycle, just a controller, a screen, and Google servers doing the heavy lifting somewhere else. Then Google gave that future an end date. It said players could access their Stadia libraries through January 18, 2023, and it would refund Stadia hardware bought through the Google Store, plus game and add on content bought through the Stadia Store. That refund made the shutdown less brutal, but it also revealed the real flaw. Stadia was not only selling streaming technology, it was selling trust. Players were asked to buy games for a service, while the place those games lived was not in their home. The controller could stay on the desk, but the console was really in Google's data centers. So the mystery is not just why cloud gaming is hard, the mystery is why Stadia made the easiest part, buying a game, feel dangerous. That is why the shutdown notice belongs at the beginning, not the end. It turns the whole story upside down before the product even gets explained. The promise was frictionless access, the fear was temporary access, the shutdown made both feel true at once. To understand the failure, you have to give the original idea its best version. Stadia was a cross platform cloud gaming service. The game ran remotely, then streamed to supported TVs, computers, Chromebooks, tablets, and phones. Under Stadia Pro, the pitch reached up to 4K at 60 frames per second with HDR. In plain English, Google wanted the screen you already owned to become the console. The controller was the object you could touch, but it was not the machine. It was more like a remote control for a gaming platform in the cloud. Even the controller design tried to solve the obvious fear. The Stadia controller could connect over Wi Fi directly to Google's servers, a setup meant to reduce input lag. That detail matters because latency was not a side complaint. In cloud gaming, every button press becomes a promise. Press jump, and the remote machine has to respond quickly enough that your hands still believe the game is local. This made Stadia different from simply plugging a controller into a local device. The supported screen was mostly a window. The real game machine was somewhere else, and the network connection became part of the controller loop. That was elegant when it worked and unforgiving when it did not. The strange part is that Stadia did not sound ridiculous on paper. If any company could make streaming feel normal, Google looked like a serious candidate. It already lived in the world of remote computing, video delivery, and devices that were less important than the service behind them. Stadia's promise fit that worldview. Instead of buying a powerful local machine, you would borrow power from a network. Instead of treating the living room as the center of gaming, you could move between supported screens. And later, when Google explained the shutdown, it still said the underlying streaming technology could be applied across YouTube, Google Play, augmented reality, and industry partners. That is the important split. The technology story was never empty, but a good technology story is not the same thing as a good consumer platform. Here's where the pitch starts to bend. The better Stadia sounded as infrastructure, the more dangerous one question became for players: what exactly am I buying? This was the ownership trap. Stadia was not simply a giant rotating subscription library. Users bought games for the service, while Stadia Pro was a monthly tier for higher stream quality and a rotating library of claimed games. That combination created a psychological mismatch. A console buyer can point to the box under the TV. A PC buyer can point to the machine on the desk. A Stadia buyer was buying access inside a store that existed only as long as the service kept existing. That does not mean the purchases were fake, it means the feeling was fragile. Every game purchase asked the customer to make a second purchase at the same time. Faith in Google's long-term patience. That is much harder than selling convenience. Convenience says you can play faster. Ownership anxiety says maybe you are building a library on rented ground. Once that doubt appears, latency, catalog size, and missing features all become evidence in the same case. The Pro tier made the confusion sharper because it added a subscription layer without replacing individual purchases. A player could understand each piece separately, buy a game, claim rotating Pro titles, pay for better stream quality. The problem was the total story. It still left the library tied to a service whose future the customer could not inspect. Then the future arrived looking incomplete. Stadia launched on November 19, 2019 with 22 games, and by the end of 2020 it had more than 130. Those numbers can sound fine in isolation, but a platform is not judged in isolation. It is judged against what players already have. If someone already owns a console, a PC, or a library somewhere else, a new platform has to give them a reason to move. Early reception was mixed, with criticism centered on the limited game library and missing promised features. Latency doubts made that problem heavier, but they were not the whole story. A little delay can be forgiven if the platform feels essential. A thin catalog can be forgiven if the platform feels inevitable. Missing features can be forgiven if the roadmap feels trustworthy. Stadia had to ask for all three forms of forgiveness at once. This is the first big lesson: a streaming console does not only need good servers, it needs a reason to choose risk over habit. A launch library of 22 games also created a first impression problem. A new platform can survive a small start if the missing pieces feel temporary. But Stadia's mixed early reception meant the small start was paired with questions about whether promised features and the broader value proposition were arriving fast enough. The hardest thing for Google to shortcut was not bandwidth, it was desire. Consoles are not only hardware businesses, they are ecosystem businesses, and ecosystems need reasons that cannot be found everywhere else. That is why exclusives matter. They are not just bragging rights, they tell players this platform has a future worth entering. Stadia Games and Entertainment was the part of the plan that was supposed to create some of that gravity. But on February 1, 2021, Google said it would stop investing further in exclusive content from its internal Stadia Games and Entertainment team beyond near-term planned games. For a normal service pivot, that might sound like strategy. For a new gaming platform, it sounded like the center was being removed before the platform had settled. And once Google stopped acting like it was building a full console ecosystem, customers had to ask a harsher question. Was Stadia a console, or was it just a technology demo with a store attached? That timing mattered because exclusives are slow-proof. You cannot instantly manufacture the kind of game that makes people forgive a new storefront, new habits, and a new technical risk. By stepping back from further internal exclusive investment so early, Google weakened the one argument that could have made Stadia feel less replaceable. After that, the story became less about a home console and more about platform plumbing. Google could still have useful streaming technology. It could still imagine that technology living in other products with YouTube, Google Play, augmented reality, and partners all named later as possible places for the underlying work to matter. But that is a business to business style answer to a consumer problem. Players were not only asking whether Google had impressive infrastructure, they were asking whether their purchases had a home. If Stadia was going to be a platform for partners, that might make sense for Google. If Stadia was going to be a place where a player bought games one by one, it needed a clearer signal of permanence. The more Stadia looked like infrastructure, the less it looked like a library. That difference is easy to miss from inside a company. To a customer, it is everything. Infrastructure can be repurposed. A game library needs to feel protected. This is also where the product started speaking two languages. To partners, streaming infrastructure could be flexible and reusable. To players, flexibility sounded like uncertainty. A platform that can become anything may be exciting in a strategy memo, but a customer buying games wants it to remain one thing for a long time. The official collapse arrived on September 29, 2022. Google said Stadia had not gained the user traction it expected and announced it would wind down the service. The consumer timeline became brutally clear. Stadia had launched on November 19, 2019, and it would be discontinued on January 18, 2023. That is barely more than 3 years for something that was supposed to compete with the habits of console gaming. Google also said it would refund Stadia hardware bought through the Google Store and game and add-on content bought through the Stadia Store. As customer service, that mattered. It reduced the financial damage for eligible purchases. As a product story, it was devastating. The refund was generous, but it also proved that the platform could erase the place where purchases lived. The shutdown notice turned a vague fear into a calendar date. After that, Stadia was no longer the future of gaming. It was a countdown, and the refund made the lesson impossible to ignore. In cloud gaming, trust is part of the product. The dates also compressed the drama. From launch to discontinuation, Stadia did not even make it through a normal console generation. It arrived as a bet that hardware could matter less, then ended as proof that commitment mattered more. That is why the refund did not fully solve the reputation problem. Money and confidence are different things. A refund can make a receipt less painful. It cannot make future players forget that a purchased cloud library depended on the platform staying alive. Stadia's model asked people to buy games for the service, and the shutdown showed what happens when the service itself ends. Even if the financial handling was better than many users feared, the emotional lesson was still clear. The player did not control the ground underneath the library. For any future cloud gaming platform, that is the shadow Stadia left behind. It made the category harder to sell, not because streaming can never work, but because the buyer now has a sharper question. If I buy this game here, what happens when the company changes strategy? That question is poisonous for a platform. It moves the conversation away from fun, speed, and convenience and toward exit plans, refunds, and survival. The chilling effect is easy to understand. A player does not need to study corporate strategy to feel the risk. They only need to remember that Stadia's store, access model, and library all depended on the same service staying open. The lazy conclusion is that Stadia proved cloud gaming cannot work. That is too simple. Google itself said the underlying technology could still be useful across other parts of its business and with industry partners. The sharper conclusion is that infrastructure is not a complete consumer platform. Stadia needed low latency, but low latency was only table stakes. It needed a catalog large enough to compete with existing habits. It needed exclusive reasons to care. It needed pricing expectations that made sense to people who were not sure whether they were subscribing, buying, or renting access. Most of all, it needed a durable answer to ownership anxiety. Players do not only buy frames per second, they buy into a world where their time, saves, purchases, and habits feel like they will still matter tomorrow. Stadia could explain the server path. It could sell the absence of a console box, but it never made the missing box feel safer than the old one. That is why the strangest survivor of Stadia is not a game or a store, it is the controller. That is why blaming one variable misses the product lesson. Latency, ownership anxiety, weak exclusives, and limited early momentum reinforced each other. None had to destroy the platform alone. Together, they made every new purchase feel like a referendum on whether Google would still care later. After shutdown, the most concrete afterlife was almost symbolic. Google provided a software update path to enable Bluetooth connectivity on Stadia controllers. The cloud console vanished, but the controller could still be rescued as a normal object. At the same time, Google said the underlying streaming technology could be applied elsewhere, including YouTube, Google Play, augmented reality, and industry partners. So Stadia did not disappear in one clean piece. The technology story scattered into possible uses. The controller gained an escape hatch. The consumer platform became a warning label, and that warning is bigger than Google. For cloud gaming, the hard feature is not only making a button press feel fast, it is convincing players that their library has a future. Stadia failed because the console was not missing from the living room. It was missing from the trust equation. The box disappeared, and then the confidence disappeared with it. That ending is too neat. The physical controller needed liberation from the cloud service it was built to reach. It became the object lesson. Hardware was not the old weakness Stadia had escaped. Hardware was the part players could still trust when the platform disappeared.